God, what is that smell? Oh my lord, it's the new stink bow. Yeah, we're gonna be talking about the best perks for this weapon. The stink bow is a hard-hitting bow that does tons of damage, and it's a primal weapon, which means it has that unknown, not fully understood glitch where it does a ridiculous amount of damage sometimes. I was clocking 4.2 million damage versus a smasher with one of the perk loadouts I'll show later. That doesn't happen every time, but even without that extra bonus damage, it's hitting pretty hard, and it leaves behind a stinky cloud of damage. That amount of damage is not currently doing a sufficient amount to be worth anything. In the high-level zones, the 164 players with double crit damage, critting with totally rocking out, those stink clouds were doing like 12,000 damage apiece, which is not a lot. Enemies up there have millions of health, and it just doesn't really do anything. I suspect that might be buffed in the future. There are weapons like the Cloud Burst that do a ridiculous amount of damage in that residual cloud of steam, and that's awesome, but that is a different weapon completely. I'll link the video down below if you guys want to check out the best perks or some gameplay for it, but the Primal Stink Bow still hits pretty hard, and I still want to show you how to perk it just in case you want to use it to maximum effectiveness. Now, if you're one of those people who just pauses the video and runs away, I have bad news. There are multiple ways to perk this weapon, so we're just going to start with the element. If you guys haven't seen my elements guide, I'll link it down below, but basically you want to match the element to the zone that you're playing. Mine is spec'd for water for two reasons. It actually came that way, lucky me, and we were running fire missions today, so lucky me. You want to run nature in a water zone and fire in a nature zone. That's pretty much it. You probably never want to run this physical. However, it does do very good single target damage as mentioned, so using this versus blasters and takers to do a lot of damage up front is probably fine, but I still think matching the element to the right zone is generally the best advice. It depends on exactly what you're doing. Now, for the actual perks, there are quite a few options. Now, the one that I'm running here is technically the maximum DPS build. You are running double crit damage and crit rating. This is ideally, you can see the 570% crit damage is ideally paired with a bow loadout. I am currently sitting here with a Rabbit Raider build with totally rocking out. I'm going to talk about the loadouts as we show the different options. Basically, with Rabbit Raider and Lee, we're critting super hard, and with totally rocking out in support, which you get from Dennis Jr., by the way, we are activating a lot of crit rating, and we're critting very often. Battle Beat and Subwoofers are just sort of what I'm rocking here if you guys are looking to recreate the build. I do have a video on the best bow loadout, link to that down below. That'll give you a lot of different recommendations, but basically this is that, and we have Farah in support. I want to note, as of release, the Stink Cloud does not activate Farah's perk. That is a known bug. So in the future, just like the Cloud Burst clip that I can show here, the Cloud Burst Steam activates her perk and like damages enemies periodically. That should happen with the Stink Bomb in the future, but that's not currently what's going on. So maybe use her in support just for the initial hit, but you should want to use that later on. I just want to say that Totally Rockin' Out works for this build to be the optimal damage per second. So if you're looking to eliminate stuff as fast as possible, this might work. However, I want you to consider several things. Now, I recommend for optimal general use a reload perk here instead, because you will be constantly shooting 75% faster, which is functionally 75% more damage going out periodically. You will hit less hard, but you're still going to be able to one-shot takers and blasters if you're critting. So the extra crit damage you're getting is actually wasted on those targets as they're already going to die. What's also worth considering is that Smashers have 4.8 million health in the 164 players. I always do my math in the highest zone, so this breakdown won't necessarily apply to every zone in the game, but suffice it to say that you will be shooting 3 shots, which is all you need to kill a Smasher if you crit all 3 times, and it will take you 3.9 seconds if you're reloading every 1.3 seconds. With a reload perk, you're going to kill a Smasher in maybe 4 shots, I believe, and you're going to be getting those shots off in 2.8 seconds. So you'll actually kill faster with a reload perk, and we're all human. We're not going to be hitting every single shot, and recovery with a reload perk is a lot more forgiving, and I honestly think reload beats double crit damage in every scenario other than just feeling good. If you want to crit super hard, and you want to make a fun video like I do as a YouTuber, or if you're just having a fun time, yeah, you can run double crit damage. It'll work. You'll be reloading slowly. You'll be hitting like a truck, probably doing more damage than you need, but it'll feel good. So, all right. Now, like I said earlier, the double crit damage does make the Stink Cloud do more, but it's negligible as of release. So if that gets updated with damage in the future, maybe I can redo this video. But for now, I recommend a reload perk, and those are all the reasons why. The middle perk is actually silly. We're going to talk about that later. The bottom perks are what I want to talk about. You absolutely never want to run double crit rating. Zenith users, I see you. You still want one crit rating perk. You're going to freeze enemies perfectly fine with that. If you're sole purpose is just freezing smashers in place, yeah, you can run double crit rating and be happy about it. But when the smasher is frozen, what do? I guess you could use the plasmatic discharger if you want to just kill it quickly. If you're just a pure support teammate, you can freeze more often. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, I'm gonna link my Zenith video down below. I'll probably have some gameplay with it in the Xenombo from that video. It's a really, really good build for freezing enemies in place. However, totally rocking out and 1 crit rating perk is absolutely sufficient to freeze enemies in place. You do not need double crit rating. You'll get diminishing returns. The second crit rating perk will always do less because of the way that crit rating stacks. I'm going to show a chart here, so if you're in a dark room, there's a bit of a flashbang warning right now. There you go. So here's what I'm looking at. At 30 crit rating, you're going to up your crit chance by 28%. At 60 crit rating, you're down to 41%. The second crit rating perk is adding 13%, whereas the first one added 28%. Then, it's not possible on this current Stinkbow weapon. If you do a third one, you're only adding a little bit of extra damage. You can see it's only 7% more. So for every crit rating perk, you're adding less and less and less damage. And I actually showed this in my typewriter video, link to that down below. There are 3 loadouts in that video, and it's a super long video. So if you use the timestamps on there and click to the end, you'll see exactly what the performance is of a triple crit rating typewriter. It's abysmal, and I'll showcase it in that video. Link to that down below if you want to check it out. Never do a double crit rating, all right? Never. Crit rating, crit damage is what you want to do if you want to maximize damage output. Some of you don't like using crit builds on a bow. I get it. You're only shooting 1 shot, and if you don't crit, it sucks. However, even if you use double damage, you're not really going to be killing in 2 or 3 or 4 shots necessarily. You might get some pretty consistent damage output for like the basic enemies, which don't need that much help, and you might do pretty good against mist monsters. But if you kill a mist monster in 3 shots with a damage perk, that is roughly when you would have crit anyway, and you would have crit more often if you're using Totally Rockin' Out anyway. So, you know, there's something to consider there. Double damage feels good and consistent, but crit rating, crit damage will on average kill in roughly the same amount of shots, and it does have the opportunity to hit in 1 hit, and that's very, very satisfying, and it's way more consistent with Totally Rockin' Out. So I honestly recommend a crit build. It's annoying when you don't crit, but it is worth it in the long run. And then headshot damage is only recommended if you're an absolute pro at the game. I would not even trust myself to run it that way. I think crit build and reload is probably just the boring, most consistent way to go. I know it's tempting to run a fire rate perk on this as well. I run fire rate on every single bow that I can, but it's the least essential of the options in my opinion. So it is unfortunately taking a backseat with this recommendation. Now, this middle perk I talked about earlier, I'm running it damage to mist monsters and bosses because they're the only enemies that really need any help. However, that Stink Cloud does apply affliction. So, okay, if you want to up your Stink Cloud damage, which as a release is not worth it, that could be worth it in the future to up the Stink Cloud damage, do 45% more from that. And it does make your weapon do more. However, I've broken this down in many videos. Your first shot will not have that bonus. Your second shot will have that bonus. So now you're doing 45% total damage over 2 shots, which is basically a 22.5% damage bonus. On that third hit, you'll be doing another 45% bonus damage, and your average damage per shot is now 30%. You see, you need to hit an enemy 4 times. You need to hit a mist monster 4 times, that is, to make it worth replacing this perk. And most mist monsters, if you crit, are dead already. So that extra damage to afflicted can be nice. Maybe you use your shot hitting a basic target. Now you activate a Stink Cloud that affects a large crowd of enemies. Then, one of those enemies being a mist monster, then you focus fire the mist monster with your bow. That could be worth it. You know, there is a real argument for damage to afflicted targets. I'm basically talking about the future here, assuming this Stink Cloud gets buffed. If it stays the same damage, most of this is irrelevant, but if it ever gets buffed to do anything like the Steam Cloud damage, then this actually could be a worthwhile perk. However, as of now, I think it's inferior to damage to mist monsters and bosses. And then slowed and snared doesn't, I mean, you're not slow and snaring, I don't even know why it's an option. You might stun and stagger enemies, but it's still the same conversation as damage to afflicted. It's not going to be your first hit, and then your follow-ups, I mean, you might as well just use damage to mist monsters and bosses in the first place. The 6 perks actually have a kind of a conversation here. Mine came with 30% damage above 85% health, and that's really nice because with a bow, you're probably starting on fresh targets a lot, and you're hitting for millions when you crit at least. So that extra 30% kind of goes a long way. It's a nice little bonus. It's basically like having the Preemptive Strike team perk built into your weapon. I kind of like it. It's a decent perk to have. However, Frenzy is really nice. Frenzy gives you a fire rate bonus. I know it's not said here, but it does make your weapon shoot faster. So we can kind of, sort of get our fire rate perk on this weapon after all. Of course, you are going to have to eliminate a Mist monster to activate that. So the Mist monster is already dead, which I guess if you pop a wafer, one-shot a Mist monster, with Frenzy activated, you can move on to the next Mist monster. It can maybe make taking out an encampment really easy, plus your movement speed is really high, so you can get out of the way, maybe protect yourself. It's a good perk to have. Eliminating 5 enemies would work if you're running Pharah and you're hitting a bunch of enemies at once, or if your Steam Cloud eliminated them in the future when it does a lot of damage. The Frenzy perks here are actually pretty good. Depending on your playstyle, you might want to consider it, or if you just got this weapon with one of those perks and you don't have a core perk, it makes perfect sense to just keep it. I honestly think they're pretty good. So that's basically it for the best perks for the Stink Bow. Depending on how you're running it, you're going to want to switch it around. Like I said, there are a few considerations depending on what perks you're running. And yeah, it's a pretty fun weapon. I think in the future it could be super viable if we got a buff to the Stink Cloud. However, on release, it seems like an inferior Cloud Burst, and the Cloud Burst is already pretty strong. So it's a hard sell right now, but if you wanted the perks, there you have them. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, feel free to subscribe. Stay tuned for the next one. I'll see you guys later, and thanks for watching. And then